What is this? Another Trans Am episode within a month? A month? Well, it's not within the same month. Within 30 days of the last one. Yeah, so it's not too good to be true. We are here today, once again, working on the Trans Am. And today's gonna be all about getting this engine cleaned up. I wanna get it descaled, get all this powder off. I'm gonna break it down, take the accessory drive off, pull the coils, the intake, permanently mount the oil pan because it currently doesn't have a pickup tube in there or a gasket. And then we're gonna bring it over to the car, drop it in temporarily, and I'm gonna show you guys how to modify the body's C100 harness. Remember, that's the harness that's gonna be going to the gauge senders on the block. That goes to the gauges and makes all the stuff inside the car work. Basically, just cutting out the stuff we're not gonna need, extending the wires that need to go to the senders, and just really re-looming it and cleaning it up and getting it ready for the final install. So last episode, in case you missed it, link at the top of the screen, we got a lot of friggin' stuff done on this. It was a long one, but a lot of the tedious work I was kind of trying to avoid, well, pushing off because I didn't feel like doing. It's done. The harness is ran through the firewall. We got it wired up. We got wires going to the fuel pump. Batteries relocated. The dashboard's back in. We got the pedals mounted up. I kind of ran through the C100 harness with you guys and explained how to get the stock gauges to work with the new motor. And today, yeah, we're just gonna get the motor cleaned up, get it in the car, finish up the wiring by cleaning up that C100 harness, cutting out any wires we're not gonna need, and once again, just getting it ready to finally be dropped in. But before we do that, I do need to address the elephant in the room, AKA the DoD lifters. So DoD, displacement on demand, AFM, active fuel management, whatever the hell you want to call it, for anybody who's not familiar with it, it's basically what kicks the engine down from 8 to 4 cylinders to save gas. I don't know if it kicks it down to 6 as well. I'm not 100% sure on that, but basically it's a way to save fuel. You're driving on the highway, the engine will turn off half of the cylinders to save some gas. Now, there is some issues with these lifters. It's kind of a common problem for them to fail and cause like a freaking huge problem with the engine. And this currently has them in there still. I didn't crack it open or do anything to try to delete them or anything like that, which normally people would do. Now, the main reason for this is, I've stressed this before, I don't want to break into this thing and cam it or do heads or nothing to it at first. I want to just drop it in the car the way it is with the 6L80E and see how it performs, so we have a kind of comparison over how the car did with its stock drivetrain. Remember, we took a 0 to 60 test, which was around, I think, 9 seconds. So I want to see what this thing's going to do, just ripping it out of a Yukon, throwing it in your 80s hot rod, and seeing what it does, because I think it's going to still be hilariously funny how much faster it's going to be without even touching it, doing a cam or anything. Now, I do have a C7 intake from a C7 Corvette intake on here, just because the truck intake will not clear the Trans Am's hood, and I have no intentions of changing that either. It's gonna make a little more power with it, but it's an easy kind of bolt-on external thing, so I don't feel too bad about it. And yeah, this motor has like 62,000 miles on it, so I'm not too concerned about the lifters being an issue. Plus, I'm not gonna be running DoD, so it's gonna constantly be in 8-cylinder mode, which is gonna put less stress on the lifters. Plus, let's be real, how long am I gonna be driving this thing? Maybe a couple thousand miles before we get our numbers, do some tests with it, and then we're breaking into it to cam it, do heads, and boost it. So let's start tearing this thing down, getting it cleaned up, getting it painted, then we'll get it dropped in the car. All right, so the block is just about done. This is looking a hell of a lot better from when I started. And all I did to clean this up was use a brass wire wheel and a drill. Just kind of buffed that scale off, came out really nice. On top of that, I hit it with some Mother's mag polish just to put a little layer of protection on there. Maybe it'll keep the corrosion back from coming back a little while, I don't know. In the end, I didn't want to paint it, so I just kept the bare aluminum finish. All it's really left to do block-wise is to clean the timing cover up. I'm probably gonna paint that just with some, cast aluminum paint, and I need to still kind of buff out the tops of the heads, the valve covers, and the valley cover. Unfortunately, these fuel rails are absolutely stuck into the heads. Can't get them freed up. GM apparently has a tool that's used to pull them out of the heads. I went ahead and ordered it because I'm desperate right now, and I feel like I'm gonna break something just prying on them because they do not want to move even a little bit. And yeah, all it has to do is just with all this scale that's all over the motor, the injectors are just stuck into the heads. And for anybody who's not familiar with these motors, being this is an LED3 or an LT series, not an LS, it's direct injected, and those fuel injectors, they're like that long, and they pass all the way through the head to the combustion chamber, which is why they do tend to get stuck in there. And yeah, I got most of the accessories cleaned up. I still need to finish up, the water pump, the AC compressor, stuff like that. But right now we're gonna focus on the oil pan. I'm gonna pop this off. We're gonna get the baffle installed, get the pickup tube installed, and then we're gonna seal it up with some Permatex Ultra Gray. These don't use a rubber gasket like the LS stuff. You do need some RTV to get the oil pan sealed up. All right, guys, check this thing out. All the polishing is done. I got all the scale off. I did what I could around the heads in the intake area. Unfortunately, these stupid fuel injectors, I cannot get them out. That tool was absolutely useless. 125 bucks I didn't have to spend. I'm sending it back. 5-foot pry bar, just yanking on the thing. None of them will even move like an inch. I couldn't get them to break free. And I think the problem is this thing's been sitting in the garage here for like a year. I don't know how long it's been sitting after the junkyard pulled it out of the Yukon that was crashed. So chances are once I get it in the car, get it running, get some heat cycles through it, they're probably gonna break free. But as for everything else, I got the cam sensor harness reinstalled. I got the crank sensor back in, both knock sensors. This thing looks friggin' perfect. And all the painting's done. I got the water pump hanging up, just drying. All the accessories are painted or polished up, and we're pretty much ready for final assembly. Now, I did go ahead and buy a couple of new things. For one thing, we're putting a new water pump on it. It turns out these LT style motors, the Gen 5s, you can separate the water pump from the main housing. And I did notice this has a little bit of play. You hear that click. So yeah, an AC Delco new water pump is like 60 bucks from Rock Auto. That's on the way. I have a new thermostat and housing on the way, as well as some new spark plug wires. On top of that, I do have some new coils I'm gonna be installing. I have a set that I ordered from, I don't even know if it's my Tahoe or my Camaro, I was gonna put on, and I never did. They've been sitting in the storage unit. And it turns out they are the same exact coils that came off of this thing. So instead of trying to clean all that rust up and paint them, I'm just gonna put the new ones on, save the old ones as backups. And I did also get a new belt and a new bolt for the crank pulley, because that is a torque to yield. So once you pull it off, you do need to replace it. Now I know it may be hard to believe, but this is the same engine. I was just finishing up B-roll footage on this, and it's incredible. It doesn't even look like it's a junkyard engine. It looks like it could have just freaking came out of a crate. And a couple of things I had to modify to get this intake to fit. So for one thing, being this is a Corvette intake or an LT1, a car intake, the throttle body is pitched kind of downward, whereas the truck was kind of going up. And because of that, the belt here was going to rub on the throttle body. Now, I went online and I found a couple of threads and just YouTube videos showing how to kind of get around this. And this pulley was recommended along with this belt. Now, all I did was take one of the alternator bolts out, install this idler pulley, and you can see that move the belt from potentially being all the way up here down here. And that pretty much cleared it up for me to get the intake on here and have the throttle body clear. Only problem I ran into was the belt was too short, and right here where the idler is in the bottom portion of where the belt comes off the alternator, these were rubbing. So I knew even if I got a longer belt, it wasn't going to work. So what I ended up doing was grinding the locating pin off of the belt tensioner, well, off of the boss in the water pump. So that allowed me to clock the tensioner a little bit to the left. Not only did that make the belt fit, but it moved this portion of the belt down a little bit. So I have plenty of clearance here, and this actually fits really, really good. But other than that, I had to kind of grind a little bit of metal off the casing of the throttle body just because it was rubbing on the truck alternator, and just kind of grind a little bit away on the alternator itself to clear the bottom clip for this cover on the throttle body. Well, other than that, it fits great. I'm really, really happy with the accessory drive. All the truck accessories managed to work. And last thing really left to do here is to put a belt on the AC, but to get this thing in and slide the bolt through the motor mount, the compressor does have to come off, so this probably isn't gonna go on for a while. So one last thing before we drop this in, we need to get a weight. So you guys remember when we pulled the Trans Am's old engine out, I hooked it up to the crane scale and we got a weight on it. I think it weighed around 570 pounds. I'll put the exact number on the screen, but right now let's hook her up to the scale and see what this thing's gonna weigh. Now remember, this is a 5.3, the other engine was a 5.7, and this is an all aluminum block, aluminum heads, whereas the old stuff was just all cast iron, and they're both fully dressed. So when we pulled the Trans Am's engine out, it had all the accessories, it had the manifolds, the intake, I threw the carb up there. And same thing with this. Everything's pretty much on with the exception of manifolds. So I have a set of LS exhaust manifolds that aren't gonna fit this engine, and I don't have a set of headers for this yet. So all I'm gonna do is just kind of drape these on top or hook them to the chain just so we get an accurate, you know, weight with headers and everything. And to get this hooked up, I picked up one of these lift plates. So all I'm gonna have to do is pull the intake off, pull the valley cover off, I'm gonna bolt this thing down, and this is just gonna remain on the motor until, you know, the final install is done, just so it's easier to pull it in and out. And once again, like the headers, I'll just drape the intake loosely on top so we get an accurate weight, and I'll deduct whatever this weighs. Also, I have these covers that came off of it. I don't know, I did all this work, you know, polishing this up and putting new coils on it. I don't know if I wanna put these on, but I think that even further kind of modernizes it. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think, but if they clear the AC box, I might just run them. I think that's all of them. Ow. I don't know if that was supposed to come out as two pieces, but I got it to. Yeah, it looks like there's some kind of like a baffle down here too, so that's not gonna help me at all. All right, I'm gonna have to find another way to lift this, which absolutely blows, because now if this thing is broken, that's just gonna make stuff even more difficult. There's just a whole bunch of crap that kind of hangs down below this. So the only way to get it out is to lift it straight up. And it looks, okay, I don't think I broke that. There's a connector in there. So I can pop this back down, but as far as getting this cover off, I'm pretty much shit out of luck. All right, so I managed to get the valley cover back on. I got what I'm assuming is the cam sensor back in. It just clicked right back into place, so I don't think I broke anything. But I just have a regular old chain on here. We got our crane scale hooked up, and let's see what this thing weighs. This guy doesn't weigh too much. Wow, that really doesn't weigh a lot at all, huh? All right. Now for the heavy boys. Will it come in at under at, well, 100 pounds lighter, like what I always hear about with these blocks, well, the aluminum, I don't think so. We're gonna be a little over. That's pretty close. I think we were about like 572 or 580 around there. So yeah, we're looking at about 100 pounds lighter over the original cast iron small block. Well, that looks a hell of a lot better than when we were dropping it in when the engine was all crusty and the engine bay wasn't painted. But for anybody who's kind of just tuning in, you haven't seen any of the other episodes in the series, link at the top of the screen. But yeah, this is how this Gen 5 fits in here with the stock cross member. So we got plenty of room between the starter and the cross member. The Holley oil pan down there leaves us with plenty of room. I am running just stock small block motor mounts. They're not poly or anything fancy like that. And yeah, I got the compressor installed, and as you can see, that compressor has to go on after sliding the motor mount bolt in because it kind of just hooks on here and hinges up. So it's very, very easy just to get the motor mount bolt in and then slide the compressor in after. And I guess you could probably fish it through the other side as well. You can see there's plenty of room there, but getting the nut on, once again, the compressor in is going to be a pain in the ass. And there is a little connector, if you see right there on the back of the compressor. I'm going to disconnect that, depin it, and kind of run the wires down. So that's not going to be an issue once we actually get the AC hooked up. And yeah, you can see the way I ran the wiring harness. It comes right out behind the head there. And then it could cross over, go to both sides of the engine. You're not going to see any of it coming out. Everything's just going to kind of go where it needs to go. And then the headers, once I decide what I'm going to run, they're all the way up here and they're going to be coming down. So I might just wrap this in some foil, heat barrier just for the hell of it. But yeah, this thing looks friggin' awesome and fits in there quite nicely. All right, C100. This is the last major bit of wiring we really have on the car. All the electronic fuel injection stuff is done. This is just the remaining 80 stuff that's needed to, power the accessories inside the car. Go to all of our lighting, our headlights, the headlight motors being at the Firebird, and the wiring going to the gauges, the starter motor, all that good stuff. So all I'm gonna do is go through here and eliminate the stuff that I know I'm not gonna need. So for instance, we have the old, the pink wire, the power wire that used to go to the ignition coil, the tack wire that went to the ignition coil, or the distributor rather, the old relay center for the electric coolant fan. We're not gonna be using this because mine are gonna be getting controlled through the new PCM. And yeah, all you wanna do is just go through here and eliminate the stuff you're not gonna need. And if you haven't done this before, I'm going to post a link to Austin 3rd Gen once again. They have the wiring diagrams that are pinouts for these harnesses, and you can just go through here one at a time, see what you're definitely not going to need. So for instance, on the Firebird here, D6 is the tack wire. I already hooked my tack up inside the car from the new PCM. That one I'm going to cut out flush against the bulkhead here. That's one gone. E5 is the oil temperature wire, of the oil pressure wire that goes to the gauge. That obviously we want to keep and extend, run it to our new sender reinstalled. And then dark green F5 is going to be the temperature wire. We're going to keep that extended, run it to our new sender. And then just kind of glancing through here, we have a wire for the brake warning system, which is the brake light on the dash. We're going to keep this, run it back over by the master cylinder. It's going to stay where it was. The headlight motors obviously have to stay. The wiper washer, choke heater, light blue. Don't have a choke heater anymore. This was a carbureted car. I could get rid of that one. So that's all you're gonna do. If there's some wires you're not sure of, just kind of hook them up in the bay as best as you can. Like run all the bulbs to the headlights and the wiring to the wiper motor, stuff like that. And then the stuff you're left over with that is just a weird connector that obviously can't go anywhere, you'll know you're not gonna need it anymore and you can remove it. But I'm just gonna go through this, chop all that stuff out. I got some nice new loom I'm gonna put on, tape everything up, replace some of the broken connectors. Then we'll go bring it over to the car, extend the sensor wiring for the oil pressure and the coolant temp, get those where they need to be. And I think that'll be ready to wrap this thing up. right, so I'm just about ready to loom this up. The harness is cut down. That's what I'm left with that's going back in the car. And that's everything I removed. So I have my C100 harness minimized down to pretty much only the essentials that I'm gonna need for my build. And the one thing I just wanna touch on real quick, the headlight portion of this harness, remember this is split off into two sections. So the smaller section here on the left goes to the lighting, the headlight motors, all the turn signals, stuff like that. The right larger section, that is the section that I actually modified and cut down. All the headlight stuff I didn't have to change. I just loomed it up, put some new tape on it, made it look nice, and yeah, literally nothing in there had to be modified. But as for the engine bay side that houses the gauge wiring and the starter wiring, I cut a lot of stuff out. All my cut wires here, I just kind of cut them back and staggered them so they're not gonna rub. The choke heater wiring, the alternator wire, the fan relay wire, the ignition wire right here, I left it long because this went to the old coil, and this is a nice high amperage circuit that we can reuse in the future for whatever accessory I might have to put in there. So I'm just going to cover this up, leave it outside of the loom, and we'll use that later on if we need it. But for the other ones, I just cut them out, and all we're left with is pretty much the essentials. So coming right off the connector, we go to our wiper. So our wiper motor, our wiper washer. Off of there, we come over to the two gauge wires. We got the green one for the coolant temp, the tan one for the oil pressure. Then it loops around and just goes to the starter. So remember, this is our main connection at the starter that's gonna take power from the battery and feed it into this harness, into the car. And then we have our ignition switch, starter wire. And then this last red one is, remember, for the blower harness, right by the heater box, this is where that connection is made into that harness that supplies it with power for the blower motor and all that stuff. But something I do wanna touch on, there are gonna be wires in your little diagram here that aren't in this connector. So for instance, all the air conditioning wiring, it's loomed in with this, and that's most of the wiring that's sitting in that pile, but they don't actually pass through here. So for instance, the wiring that went to the compressor, the high pressure switch, it's loomed into this, and it actually went to that one little 4-pin connector that mates into the blower harness, but it doesn't physically pass through here. So if you're going through this and you're like, why are there these wires that I have here that aren't on the diagram? It's because they're separate. So you just have to take the loom off and see where they're going. For me, I'm running my own relays. I'm making my own AC harness. So I got rid of the AC, the relay, all the wiring that went to the old compressor, the old pressure switches. I de-pinned this connector that used to connect into the blower harness. And I just saved this. I'm going to put some silicone in here and use it as a cap for now, because those wires in the engine bay we're going to use when it's time for me to actually wire up the AC. I'm going to use that as the, that's the main wire coming off of the AC control. So you turn the AC on, it gives 12 volts to the compressor. That's what fed into this connector and was just kind of loomed in here because it went to the fan relay to control the fan and stuff like that. So yeah, just something to keep in mind. You got to really look at what you're taking out here, and if you're not running AC, I mean, hell, you can just get rid of all that. You don't even have to think twice. All right, so the looming is finished. The harness is roughly installed. I went ahead and made the connection at the firewall. I have the little grommet installed where the connector for the pop-up headlights goes through. And I'm gonna kind of leave it at this for now. I don't know where I'm going to run the harness as it's like its final routing position. I'm either gonna run it underneath the brake booster or above it. I mean, one thing we know for sure, the headlight portion comes along the frame rail here, and then that's gonna go out to the headlight, so that's pretty much taken care of. But for the starter side, there's a lot of length here, and it actually could run underneath. You see I have our connectors for the wiper motor here, and then the two gauge wires come out right over here, and that goes to our oil, and then the green one to the coolant over there. But I don't know if I want to run this over the booster. It depends on where the exhaust is going to fall, and then I'll wrap these up with some heat foil or something and run them accordingly. But they're on the right side where they need to be. And then coming over here, I popped in the AC box just to kind of get a feel of how everything's going to fit. And this fits surprisingly well. All I really need to do is notch out this one section here for the coil. And once again, coming back to the harness, there's enough length here where I might just run it over the box like this. And then I put some heat shielding on the starter wires, and I can just run it down straight to the starter and not have to deal with, you know, the downpipe of the exhaust. Or, I don't know, once the exhaust is installed, maybe I could just kind of shorten it and run it behind. Really haven't decided yet. But I mean, all the major kind of engine bay wiring is done. We have our engine harness waiting to be hooked up. And from here on out, I think we're gonna start working on the transmission. All right, so this is incredible. I couldn't be happier with the progress we made this episode. Just having the engine sitting in here and cleaned up, it makes me wanna really kind of push and get the rest of the stuff installed, you know, the radiator, the condenser, figure out the hoses, the intake, get the front end together, get the wiring hooked up. So this is a huge step in getting this thing running. But next episode, I think we need to focus on the transmission, particularly the cross member. I still need to rebuild it. The case is just sitting over there empty. The pieces are scattered on the workbench, and that transmission needs a complete overhaul. But before I, you know, assemble it and make it big and heavy again, we might as well try to figure the cross member out, figure out the torque arm, and then I think we'll rebuild it, and the fuel system needs to be done. But as always, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you have any questions regarding this build and the LS stuff, definitely leave a comment down below. If you don't already follow me on Instagram, I'm gonna put a link to that in the description as well. And as always, I'm gonna link all the parts I used, as well as the wiring diagram site if you do need to do this to your 3rd gen harness. But for now, that's gonna do it for this one. See you in a few days.